15-year-old Richard Branson, armed with nothing but ambition and an insatiable thirst for adventure, walked away from the conventional path that society had laid out for him. The decision was bold, and the consequences were uncertain. It was a choice that would either lead to his downfall or catapult him into a realm of unimaginable success. Little did he know, this rebellious act would become the cornerstone of an empire that would challenge the status quo and redefine the very essence of entrepreneurship. Join us on a journey through the highs and lows, the risks and rewards, as we unravel the enigma that is Sir Richard Branson. From a young age, Branson learned the significance of values such as independence and adventure from his parents. His mother worked as a flight attendant, while his father pursued a career in law. His introduction into the working world came from his mother, Eve, who was always using her limitless imagination to come up with new business ideas. She was resolute and taught Branson, if any item didn't sell, to try something else. He made plenty of mistakes and was able to learn from them rather than spending time fretting over every single error. One of his first entrepreneurial mistakes was at the age of 11, when he decided it was time to start his own small business. Branson and his best friend, Nick Powell, set out to breed budgerigars, a small sociable Australian parakeet. They saw a gap in the market to sell budgies as they were very popular with kids in school at the time. However, the birds kept multiplying quicker than they could sell them, and the school holidays were coming to an end, forcing them to abandon the business. Branson never dwelled on failures because he was always on to the next adventure, which happened to be selling Christmas trees. He planted the trees in the backyard of his red brick home, but rabbits ate all his saplings. Although his initial businesses never amounted to anything, he learned important lessons that would propel him through his future endeavors. Branson struggled with conventional academia due to his dyslexia. He frequently sought the relevance of the information presented to him and resisted anything that did not directly apply to his direction in life. This resilience transformed a high school student into a global icon when he made the decision to leave it all behind at the age of 15. Possessing an inherent entrepreneurial spirit, Branson continued on and launched his first business merely 1 year after dropping out of high school. He created Student Magazine, which was his alternative to the state publications and school magazines of the day. Student gave young people a voice and challenged perceptions of youth culture, covering everything from pop culture and music to the Vietnam War. Branson monetized the magazine by placing ads for mail-order music records, which sold at a significant discount compared to brick-and-mortar shops. The first issue of Student appeared in January of 1968, and 1 year later, Branson's net worth was estimated at £50,000. The magazine featured interviews from famous artists like Mick Jagger and John Lennon, and Branson ended up using the magazine to advertise popular albums, driving his record sales. His business sold records for considerably less than the high street outlets. Branson once said, "There's no point of starting your own business unless you do it out of a sense of frustration." At the time, many products were sold under restrictive marketing agreements that limited discounting. Soon, record sales were doing so well that Branson decided to transform it into a brick-and-mortar store on Oxford Street in London, and Virgin Records was born. It brought a fun twist to retail, offering a place to listen to records and relax with friends, and earn a reputation as an industry disruptor. After making the shop into a success, they turned their business into a fully fledged record label. The name Virgin arose from Tessa Watts, a colleague of Branson's. She suggested Virgin, as they were all new to business, like virgins. The company grew into an influential record label that probably did things differently, but not everything went as planned. In 1971, Branson was arrested and questioned in connection with the selling of records declared export stock. He spent one night in prison before the matter was resolved and was never brought before a court because he agreed to repay any unpaid purchase tax of 33% and a £70,000 fine. His parents had to remortgage the family home in order to pay for the settlement, and Branson responded by expanding Virgin Records by opening up 30 more stores in order to pay back his mother, which ultimately took 3 years, but it was a significant boost for the business in the long run. Branson bought a country estate north of Oxford, in which he installed a residential recording studio. He leased studio time to fledgling artists, including multi-instrumentalist Mike Oldfield, whose debut album, Tubular Bells, was the first release for Virgin Records and became a chart-topping bestseller. Virgin signed controversial bands such as the Sex Pistols, which other companies were reluctant to do at the time. The record company would go on to sign other artists, including the Rolling Stones, Janet Jackson, and Paula Abdul. It became one of the world's largest independent record record labels. Branson turned his sights on an island in the British Virgin Islands. However, since he was still in the early days of Virgin Records, by no means did he have the cash to buy the Caribbean island, which was listed for $6 million. Luckily, the realtor didn't know and offered him an all-expense-paid trip to see the islands. Branson offered the highest amount he could afford, $100,000. As you can imagine, the realtor was less than impressed and left him high and dry to find his own way back home. 1 year later, the owner of Necker Island still hadn't received an offer and was desperate to sell. And since Virgin Records was in a much better position than it had been a year before, Branson quickly agreed to a purchase price of $180,000, a 97% discount from the original asking price. His island retreat now attracts celebrities and entrepreneurs and has even welcomed former President Barack Obama. Richard Branson's insatiable appetite for entrepreneurship didn't end with Virgin Records. After having his flight grounded in Puerto Rico on his way back from the British Virgin Islands, he was stuck on the tarmac with few options, and after being gone from home for 3 weeks, Branson became frustrated and went to the back of the plane where he figured out how much it would cost to charter a plane to the British Virgin Islands. He then walked up and down the aisles of the grounded airplane selling tickets for just $39. The charter ended up being Virgin Atlantic's first flight. Since Branson spent so much time on board other aircrafts traveling across the world to his different music shops, he often became frustrated and realized he could make the experience much better.
In those days, if you flew on, say, British Airways, it was a monopoly. You maybe got a lump of chicken dumped in your lap. There was no entertainment. The cabin crew certainly didn't enjoy working for the company, and you really felt like you were just being herded from A to B in a cattle truck.
After a successful charter flight out of Puerto Rico, Branson had all the confidence he needed to continue with his airline endeavors. He ended up using his profits from Virgin Records to lease a second-hand 747 from Boeing. Branson made the experience on Virgin Galactic memorable with innovations such as video screens on the back of chairs, adding fully retractable seats in first class so business passengers could sleep better on the flight, and stand-up bars and lounges. Branson knew he would succeed by making an exceptional company over an average company. In a publicity stunt for Virgin Atlantic, Branson and his team set out to cross the Atlantic in record time during June of 1985. They would cross the ocean in a custom-made boat named the Virgin Atlantic Challenger. However, this first attempt ended in disaster, as the boat began sinking just 60 miles away from their destination. Initially, the stunt raised safety concerns of the airline because if the boat couldn't make it, how successful would the planes be? The stunt actually proved the opposite and gained international notoriety, in turn providing cheap advertising for the airline. Even though the first attempt was unsuccessful, Branson gave it another go a year later in a ship with the updated name, the Virgin Atlantic Challenger 2. Branson completed the crossing in 3 days, 8 hours, and 31 minutes. He had shaved 2 hours and 9 minutes off the time set by the United States in 1952. Since the stunt was so successful, Branson knew he had to come up with similar ways of advertising in order to compete with British Airways, the most popular airline at the time. Admittedly, Branson loved to achieve things that hadn't been done before and decided to embark on a transatlantic hot air balloon flight in 1987 after being convinced by Per Lindstrand that it would be safe and relatively easy. Immediately after takeoff, the pair lost a fuel tank, although everything else went to plan. Branson and Lindstrand soared at speeds of up to 130 miles per hour on the Atlantic jet stream, 27,000 feet in the air. 1 hour into the flight, everything was going just as they predicted, and they began pinching themselves as if they were in a dream. The landing on July 3rd, however, was much more problematic. With fog reported in Scotland, their intended destination, they ended up grounding the balloon in Northern Ireland after 31 hours and 41 minutes of flying, setting the record. They came in too fast for the landing, so they had to take off again to avoid nearby power cables. They lost control of the balloon while trying to land it in the sea, and Lindstrand bailed out of the vessel. Branson, however, stayed inside the balloon and was raised up to the sky again. Lindstrand, down below in the water, panicked knowing Branson was inexperienced at flying the balloon. Luckily, Branson was able to bring the balloon back to the water. Both were eventually rescued from the freezing water by the Royal Navy. British Airways began to see Branson's company as a threat. Virgin started being awarded landing slots at London Heathrow Airport, putting them in direct competition with one another. British Airways had a plan. They were going to put the airline out of commission. Ultimately known as the Dirty Tricks campaign, British Airways chairman Lord King told his chief executive to do something about Branson. British Airways representatives began impersonating Virgin employees and calling up Virgin customers, telling them their flights had been canceled, and immediately convincing them to switch their flights to British Airways. But that wasn't enough to stop Branson. British Airways also hired a team of hackers to gain access to Virgin's flight plans, and would contact passengers who had delayed flights to get them to switch over. British Airways also targeted Branson's other endeavors in an attempt to find something they could use to discredit the overall brand. Branson became aware of the campaign after a tip-off from a British Airways insider. In January of 1991, Virgin complained to the European Commission about British Airways tactics. British Airways then retaliated with Operation Barbara, releasing a dossier detailing alleged negative aspects of Virgin's business, claiming Virgin Airline was going bankrupt. Newspapers started to print false negative stories about Virgin, which made passengers weary of booking. In March of 1992, Virgin sued British Airways after Lord King claimed Virgin was just seeking publicity following the claims of Operation Barbara. British Airways then countersued, claiming that Branson's accusations of dirty tricks were baseless. The British press had dubbed the upcoming cases as the mother of all libel battles. Branson was then forced to sell his record business, Virgin Records, in order to pay for the legal battle. The company was bought by Thorn EMI in June of 1992 for a reported £560 million. British Airways agreed to settle the case by apologizing to Mr. Branson and paying him and his company $945,000 in damages. It also agreed to pay for all of the court costs stemming from a suit brought by Mr. Branson, estimated at $3 million. Branson distributed all the winnings to his staff equally, which he called the BA bonus. After all, Branson credited the success of the airline to his employees. Branson was never the type to look back and continued creating and acquiring new business under the Virgin brand. Virgin Mobile had the innovative idea of allowing customers to pay as they go, unlike traditional phone plans at the time. He partnered with service providers to launch Virgin Mobile. They supplied the network and he supplied the marketing and branding. Virgin Mobile was eventually sold under the holding company Virgin Media for $15 billion in 2013. By this point, customers could trust the Virgin brand because of Branson's overwhelming focus on innovation, quality, and customer experience. Branson eventually set his eyes on space with the announcement of Virgin Galactic. He hoped to be able to start bringing people to space in 2007. However, there were massive delays as the company struggled to get the vessels ready. On October 31st, 2014, the fourth rocket-powered test flight of the VSS Enterprise ended in disaster. Initial reports attributed the loss to an unidentified in-flight anomaly, and 39-year-old co-pilot Michael Asbury was killed. Following the crash of VSS Enterprise, the replacement ship named VSS Unity was rolled out on February 19, 2016. However, the first flight to space wouldn't happen until 2018, 11 years after the initial projection in 2007. Branson himself rode along with 5 other Virgin Galactic personnel for the first fully crewed test spaceflight of Unity in July 2021. But it wasn't until June 29, 2023 when Virgin Galactic would finally launch its first commercial spaceflight. In a recent statement, Branson has ruled out putting more money into Virgin Galactic, saying his business empire does not have the deepest pockets anymore. He announced Virgin Galactic would be cutting jobs and suspending commercial flights for 18 months in a bid to preserve cash for the development of a larger plane, Delta, that could carry passengers to the edge of space. Branson is still loving the Virgin Galactic project, and it has really proved itself in the technology of commercial spaceflight. Virgin Galactic has just completed its 6th commercial flight, with tickets starting at $450,000 a seat, well above the anticipated $200,000. In 2012, Branson created a new company branched off his larger space venture called Virgin Orbit. Branson began using modified Boeing 747s to launch satellites into orbit because deploying them from a plane came at a significantly cheaper cost than launching them from the ground. Virgin Orbit was promising for smaller satellite launches because they would no longer have to hitch rides on bigger launches, which typically wouldn't release the satellites in the right locations, and the launch price would be much higher. The UK Space Agency was looked at as an important relationship for Virgin Orbit because they'd be a good customer for small launches. The first launch was set for January of 2023 on UK soil, but it didn't go as planned when there was a failure to launch. Virgin Orbit stock plummeted in the wake of the failed launch, and in March of 2023, Virgin Orbit laid off 85% of its staff, then filed for bankruptcy the following April. In 2017, Branson invested in an innovative company that set out to reimagine the way we travel. The company was renamed Virgin Hyperloop, and Branson became the chairman of the board of directors. A Hyperloop is a high-speed transportation system for both public and goods through a pod inside a tube. The tube is a large, sealed, low-pressure system, usually in the shape of a long tunnel. The pod is propelled using magnets, which allows for a smooth ride while traveling at high speeds. The company sounded great on paper. You get the benefit of the speed of an airplane and the convenience of a train with zero direct emissions. Although the technology was effective, the tunnels just weren't practical, since Earth's surface is full of bumps, twists, and turns, which would require the pod to slow down in certain areas, defeating the purpose. Plus, manufacturing the long tunnels above ground would cost billions and make it much more expensive than air travel. Virgin Hyperloop eventually abandoned its efforts to be the first people carrier, as well as laying off over half of their staff, which doesn't come as a surprise because the company was doomed from the start. As we conclude this journey through the extraordinary life of Sir Richard Branson, it becomes evident that his legacy is far from a linear narrative. Branson's journey reminds us that the pursuit of greatness is not without its share of turbulence and tests. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and watch another one.